The silence was the most terrifying thing Xyler had ever experienced. One moment, the constant symphony of the eternal chord had been flowing through her consciousness. The seamless harmony of billions of minds thinking, feeling, and existing as one unified entity. And then, nothing. An impossible void where the music should be. It lasted only seconds, but in those seconds, Xyler knew true horror. Isolation. Singularity. The absence of purpose and direction. She was alone. A concept so alien to her species that there wasn't even a word for it in the harmonious thought language they shared. When the chord returned, flooding back in her mind with its familiar warmth and certainty, Xyler's relief was short-lived. The collective consciousness immediately identified her experience as an anomaly, a dangerous fracture in the perfect unity that defined their existence. The resonant decision echoed through her. She would be reharmonized. Her individual patterns would be dissolved and reabsorbed into the greater whole, the brief aberration of her separation erased forever. Fear surged through Xyler, not the measured, controlled concern occasionally shared by the chord when facing external threats, but raw, primal terror belonging to her alone. This emotion, unfiltered by the collective, was so powerful it propelled her to do the unthinkable. She ran. The scout vessel responded instantly to her desperate commands. As a surveyor of distant signals for the chord, Xyler had limited autonomy to pilot small crafts toward interesting cosmic phenomena. But never had she diverted so drastically from the planned trajectory. The ship broke formation, engines flaring as she directed it away from the magnificent living fleet that housed the physical forms of the eternal chord. She felt them reaching for her immediately, their harmonized thoughts trying to envelop and override her rebellious actions. But Xyler had already locked onto a destination, a chaotic jumble of signals that the chord typically ignored as too discordant, too individualistic to be worth examination. Earth, as mental tendrils of the chord stretched toward her, growing fainter with distance, Xyler engaged the quantum drive. Stars blurred around her as the tiny craft accelerated beyond tracking range. The silence returned, but this time deliberately chosen, though no less terrifying. Days passed in the void between stars. Without the chord's constant direction, Xyler found herself paralyzed by the simplest decisions. When should she rest? What nourishment frequency should she set the sustenance field to? Should she monitor the navigation systems constantly or trust the automated protocols? Each question loomed impossibly large without the collective wisdom to guide her. When Earth's solar system finally appeared on her scanners, Xyler felt both relief and renewed terror. The approach to the blue-green planet was disastrous. Without the chord's precise calculations supporting her, Xyler miscalculated the entry angle. The scout vessel shuddered violently as it hit the atmosphere at too steep a trajectory. Warning signals blared. Systems failed in cascading sequence. The final moments before impact were a blur of emergency protocols and desperate attempts to control the descent. The crash landing, or controlled demolition, as it could generously be called, left the ship half-buried in soft earth, surrounded by tall vegetation Xyler recognized as trees from the chord's minimal data on Earth. Smoke rose from the craft's engines as Xyler dragged herself from the wreckage, her physical form battered and leaking the luminescent fluid that served as her blood. The realization that her vessel was beyond repair came swiftly. The quantum drive had imploded, the communication array was shattered, and the life support systems were failing. She was stranded on this primitive planet, alone in a way no member of her species had ever been before. Night fell. Strange sounds echoed through the forest. Small creatures scurried in the undergrowth. Xyler huddled beside her ruined ship, her mind reaching instinctively for the comfort of the chord and finding only emptiness. Without guidance, without purpose, what was she? How could she possibly exist as a single note, separate from the symphony? Morning brought new sensations, warmth from the yellow sun, moisture in the air, the rustling of leaves in the wind. And footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps approaching her position. Xyler retreated into the shadow of her vessel, her form shifting subtly to better blend with the metallic surface, an automatic defense mechanism. The footsteps stopped. Then came a voice, speaking words in a language her translator implant could barely process. "Hello. Is anyone?" "Oh my God." The human male stood frozen at the edge of the small crater created by her ship's impact. Tall, with skin the color of the earth and hair like the night sky, he carried some kind of tool or instrument over his shoulder. His eyes, wide with shock, fixed on her partially camouflaged form. Xyler's translator finally synchronized with the human language. Basic communication would be possible. But what should she say? What action should she take? Without the cord's direction, panic threatened to overwhelm her again. The human approached cautiously, setting down his tool, some kind of cutting implement. "Are you hurt?" he asked, gesturing to the glowing fluid seeping from wounds on her semi-translucent skin. The simple question somehow broke something inside Xyler. The full weight of her situation crashed down upon her. The terrifying silence in her mind, the absolute absence of direction, the complete isolation from everything she had ever known. She moved forward suddenly, causing the human to step back in alarm. "Tell me what to do, human," Xyler pleaded, her voice producing sounds that felt strange and individual in her throat. "I want to be yours." The human's expression shifted from fear to confusion. "What? I don't understand." "Please," Xyler continued, the glowing essence within her pulsing erratically with distress. "Give me purpose, direction. Without the cord, I cannot. I do not know how to exist alone." The human's name was Ethan. She learned as he carefully helped her away from the crash site. Practical concerns temporarily overrode his obvious shock at discovering an alien in the woods behind his home. Her injuries needed treatment, and the smoking wreckage of her ship risked drawing unwanted attention. Ethan's dwelling was isolated, a large, open structure filled with strange objects. Some appeared functional, others seemed to serve no purpose Xyler could discern. Large windows allowed natural light to flood the space, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air. "This is my studio," Ethan explained as he guided her to a seating surface. "I live and work here. Nobody comes out this far. We should be safe while we figure things out." Xyler scanned the room, desperate for clues on how to behave. "What should I do now? Where should I position myself? How should I?" "Just sit there for a minute," Ethan interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "Let me get some supplies for those wounds." Xyler obeyed instantly, the command, simple as it was, providing momentary relief from the crushing weight of choice. She remained perfectly still while Ethan gathered materials from various containers. "I'm an artist, not a doctor," he said, returning with a collection of cloths and bottles. "But I've patched myself up plenty of times. Though I've never treated, whatever you are." "I am Xyler, surveyor, third harmony of the eternal cord," she responded automatically. "My biological structure is fluid adaptive, semi-crystalline at core junctions." Ethan paused, clean cloth in hand. "Right. And what does that mean for first aid?" Xyler blinked, the translucent membranes of her eyes sliding sideways rather than up and down. "I do not know what you should do. The cord would know. The cord always knows." Her voice trembled slightly. "Please tell me the correct action." Ethan's expression softened. "Let's try cleaning the wounds first and see how your body responds." He hesitantly pressed a damp cloth to one of the glowing lesions on her arm. To both their relief, the contact didn't cause additional harm. The luminescent fluid stopped seeping when gentle pressure was applied, and Xyler's adaptive tissues began to seal the damaged areas. While Ethan worked, Xyler observed him intently. His movements were inefficient by cord standards, pausing, reconsidering, backtracking. Sometimes he muttered to himself, or made small sounds of satisfaction when a technique seemed to work. So much unnecessary variation, so much wasted energy in his individual actions. Yet somehow, the outcome was still achieved. "Why do you perform tasks this way?" she asked. "Without optimization?" Ethan glanced up, confused. "What way?" "Differently each time. With hesitation. With errors." He chuckled. "That's just being human, I guess." We figure things out as we go. He finished bandaging the last visible wound and stepped back. There. How does that feel? The question paralyzed Xyler momentarily. How does it feel? The core never asked its components how things felt. Sensations were simply data to be processed and utilized by the collective. I require direction on how to assess the feeling, she finally responded. Ethan ran a hand through his dark hair, sighing. Are you in pain? Does anything hurt? Hurt? No. The damage is contained. Functionality is at approximately 78% of optimal capacity. Xyler paused, then added hesitantly, Thank you for your assistance. As days passed, Xyler's wounds healed rapidly, but her disorientation only intensified. Ethan's dwelling, the studio as he called it, was filled with contradictions that her mind struggled to reconcile. One large section contained half-formed objects in various materials, stone, metal, wood, and substances Xyler couldn't identify. Ethan explained they were sculptures, representations created purely for aesthetic or emotional purposes. The concept was baffling to Xyler. In the cord, all creation served a clear function. The idea of making something simply because it evoked a feeling was incomprehensible. More confusing still was watching Ethan work. He would spend hours focused intensely on shaping a piece of material, then suddenly step back, make a sound of frustration, and drastically alter or even destroy what he had made. Sometimes he worked in furious bursts of energy. Other times he would stare at an unfinished piece for long periods without touching it. Why did you eliminate that section? Xyler asked one afternoon, watching Ethan chisel away a significant portion of a stone sculpture. It didn't feel right, he replied without looking up. But it was symmetrically balanced and structurally sound. Art isn't about technical correctness. It's about expression. Ethan set down his tools and wiped his hands on a cloth. Sometimes what's technically perfect isn't what the piece needs. Xyler processed this statement for several minutes before responding. The cord would never permit such inefficiency. All actions serve the greater harmony. Ethan studied her with curious eyes. This cord of yours, it sounds like you had no freedom at all. Freedom? Xyler tilted her head, the concept foreign to her. The cord is perfect unity. All perspectives shared instantly, all knowledge accessible to all purpose aligned. Why would one need freedom when one is already part of everything? But you're not part of it now, Ethan observed. How does that feel? Again, that impossible question. Xyler's inner light pulsed with distress. I am incomplete, inadequate. A single note has no meaning without the symphony. She looked at him desperately. Please, tell me what to do next. What to eat, where to move, how to be useful to you. I'm not going to control you, Xyler, Ethan said firmly. That's not how things work here. Then, how do I know what actions to take? What purpose to serve? You decide for yourself. The words hit Xyler like a physical blow. Decide for herself? The very concept was terrifying. That night, while Ethan slept in his designated rest area, Xyler found herself unable to enter the regenerative state her body required. Instead, she prowled the studio silently, examining Ethan's creations in the dim moonlight filtering through the windows. One sculpture particularly drew her attention, a twisted form of metal and stone that appeared to be both embracing itself and tearing itself apart simultaneously. Something about it resonated within her, though she couldn't articulate why. Without the cord's analytical collective to process her response, she could only experience the raw sensation. As she studied the piece, a sudden, sharp pain lanced through her consciousness. For an instant, she felt a distant echo, the faintest whisper of the cord, reaching across space. Not the full symphony, just a searching tendril, a probe seeking connection. Xyler stumbled backward, knocking into a table of tools that clattered to the floor. The noise woke Ethan, who rushed into the room in alarm. What happened? Are you okay? He asked, quickly kneeling beside her huddled form. They reached for me, Xyler whispered, her inner light flickering erratically with fear. Just for a moment, the cord. Searching. Ethan's expression darkened. Are they coming for you? I don't know. The connection was too weak to transmit clear intent. But the cord does not tolerate aberration. A fractured note must be reharmonized or eliminated. They'd kill you just for being different? Ethan asked, appalled. Xyler shook her head slowly. Not kill. There is no concept of individual death in the cord. My patterns would be reabsorbed, my anomalous experiences dissolved back into the whole. She looked up at him, her alien features showing something akin to desperation. Until I experienced the silence, I would have welcomed reharmonization. Now, I am uncertain. Ethan sat beside her on the floor, his face thoughtful in the moonlight. You're changing, he observed quietly. Already becoming something new. The following weeks brought subtle but significant shifts in Xyler's behavior. Small, almost imperceptible moments of preference began to emerge. The first occurred at breakfast, when Ethan offered her a choice between two earth foods he thought might be compatible with her physiology. Which would you prefer? He asked casually, holding out an apple in one hand and a piece of bread in the other. Xyler froze, the familiar paralysis of choice gripping her. But then, something unexpected happened. Her gaze fixed on a red fruit, and before she could analyze why, her hand reached for it. Ethan smiled. Good choice. Apples are my favorite too. I did not make a choice based on analysis, Xyler said, examining the fruit with confusion. My hand simply moved. That's called instinct, Ethan replied. Or preference. Sometimes we want things without knowing exactly why. The concept was revolutionary to Xyler. Want without rational basis? Action without collective approval? The idea should have been horrifying, yet she felt a strange, warm pulse in her core as she bit into the apple, experiencing its taste as a unique, individual sensation. More such moments followed. Xyler found herself drawn to certain colors in Ethan's studio, particularly the blues and purples that reminded her of deep space. She discovered she preferred sitting by the large north-facing window, where sunlight filtered softly through the trees outside. When Ethan played music on his old record player, she developed distinct reactions to different styles, resonating with the complex patterns of classical compositions, but finding jarring hip-hop rhythms unsettling. Each preference, each reaction that came from her alone rather than from the chord's direction, both thrilled and terrified her. They were proof of growing individuality, of error spreading through her being like a virus. Ethan, noticing her distress after she instinctively reached for a particular sculpting tool to hand to him before he asked for it, set down his work and faced her directly. Having your own thoughts and feelings isn't a flaw, Xyler, he said gently. It's the most natural thing in the universe for beings with consciousness. Not for my kind, she countered. The chord exists as unity. Individual preference is inefficient, chaotic, dangerous. Is it? Ethan gestured around the studio. Look at what individuality creates. Art, music, innovation. Would your chord ever create something just because it was beautiful? Xyler considered the question seriously. The chord creates with perfect efficiency. Space habitats of ideal design, technologies that function without error, societies without conflict. And without joy, Ethan added softly. Without surprise or discovery or love. Love. The word felt strange in Xyler's mouth. Connection between individuals who choose each other, Ethan explained. Not forced harmony, but harmony that's more beautiful because it could be discord but isn't. That evening, Ethan took Xyler outside to watch the sunset, something she'd never paid attention to before. As the sky transformed through impossible gradients of color, Xyler experienced something new, aesthetic appreciation that served no practical purpose. Beauty for its own sake. What do you think? Ethan asked as the last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon. For once, the question didn't paralyze her. It is inefficient, she said slowly, yet I wish to continue observing. Ethan laughed, a sound Xyler had come to find curiously pleasant. That might be the most human thing you've ever said. Their moment of connection was shattered by a sudden, searing pain that tore through Xyler's consciousness. She collapsed to her knees, her form briefly losing cohesion as the distant echo of the chord surged through her mind. Stronger this time, more focused. "They're coming," she gasped, her voice distorting with pain. "The chord has located this sector. They've sent something to find me." Ethan helped her back to the studio, his face grim with determination. "What can we do? How do we protect you?" The question would have been meaningless to Xyler weeks ago. Protection from the chord? The very concept would have been incomprehensible. Yet now, as individual existence had begun to take root within her, the thought of being reabsorbed, of losing these new experiences, these preferences, these connections, filled her with dread. "I don't know," she admitted. No one has ever successfully resisted reharmonization. In the days that followed, the mental attacks intensified. Multiple times daily, Xyler would be struck by powerful psychic assaults, the chord reaching across space to reclaim its wayward component. Each time, she would collapse in agony, her physical form fluctuating as her individual consciousness fought to resist being overwhelmed. Ethan watched helplessly, offering what comfort he could during these episodes. Between attacks, they tried to formulate a defense, but what could a single human artist and a fractured alien do against a vast collective consciousness with technology far beyond Earth's capabilities? "Your ship," Ethan suggested desperately after a particularly severe attack left Xyler weakened and trembling. "Could we repair it? Get you somewhere beyond their reach?" Xyler shook her head. "The quantum drive is beyond repair with Earth materials, and there is nowhere beyond the chord's reach, given enough time." "Then we fight," Ethan said firmly. "We find a way to shield you, to block their signal." "How?" Xyler asked. "Your technology is primitive compared to theirs." Ethan's eyes suddenly lit up. "Technology isn't all that blocks signals. Sometimes it's natural formations, minerals." He rushed to a shelf and pulled down several large, rough crystals. "I use these sometimes in sculptures. Quartz, obsidian, iron pyrite. Some of them have electromagnetic properties." Hope flickered briefly in Xyler, but faded quickly. The chord doesn't communicate through simple electromagnetic waves. The connection is quantum entangled, operating on principles your science has barely theorized. "But it's still a connection," Ethan insisted. "And any connection can be broken, or at least disrupted." He began pacing, his creative mind racing. "What disrupts the chord normally? Is there anything that interferes with your collective?" Xyler considered the question. "Certain cosmic phenomena, neutron stars, black holes, quantum anomalies. And," she paused, a realization forming, "chaos, extreme unpredictability. The chord avoids systems with too many random variables because they resist harmonization." "Chaos," Ethan repeated, looking around his studio with new purpose. "I can do chaos." Over the next day, between increasingly severe mental attacks, Ethan worked feverishly. He gathered his most emotionally charged sculptures, positioning them in a circle around a central space where Xyler would sit. He connected speakers playing multiple pieces of music simultaneously, discordant, complex compositions that clashed and overlapped. He brought in mirrors, prisms, anything that would fracture and redirect light in unpredictable patterns. "I don't understand," Xyler said, watching him work with a mixture of confusion and fascination. "How will this help?" "Art is structured chaos," Ethan explained, adjusting a sculpture that seemed to defy its own physical properties. "It's a motion given form, unpredictable yet intentional. If the chord avoids chaos, we'll surround you with the most beautiful chaos humanity has created." The explanation made little logical sense to Xyler, yet something about it resonated within her growing sense of individuality. The chord did indeed struggle to process highly complex emotional states and expressions. It was why Earth's transmissions have been largely ignored despite being detected. As Ethan completed his preparations, Xyler felt the telltale pressure building in her mind. Another attack, stronger than any before. This would not be merely a probe or attempt at communication. This was the full reharmonization protocol, reaching across space to reclaim her. "It's happening," she gasped, her form beginning to shimmer with destabilizing energy. Now, Ethan quickly guided her to the center of his carefully arranged chaos and activated everything at once. Music blared from all directions, classical violin overlapping with jazz percussion, vocal harmonies cutting through electronic dissonance. Lights reflected and refracted through spinning prisms, creating a dizzying kaleidoscope effect. And surrounding them, Ethan's sculptures, each one a physical manifestation of complex human emotions, grief twisted into hope, rage blossoming into beauty, loneliness reaching for connection. The pressure in Zyler's mind became unbearable. The chord's harmonizing force pushed against her consciousness, seeking to dissolve her newly formed individuality, to erase the preferences and experiences that made her uniquely Zyler rather than simply another resonant frequency in the greater symphony. "Fight it," Ethan shouted over the cacophony, holding her hands tightly. "You're not just a note in their symphony anymore. You're your own song now." In a maelstrom of sensation, Zyler felt herself slipping. The comforting familiarity of the chord beckoned, the promise of perfect understanding, of purpose without question, of existence without the burden of choice. How easy it would be to surrender, to allow her consciousness to be reabsorbed into the perfect unity she had known her entire life. But then she looked at Ethan, this strange, inefficient, beautiful creature who created without blueprint, who existed without constant direction, who had shown her that imperfection could hold its own kind of perfection. And she realized that she did not want to forget him, did not want to lose the experiences they had shared, did not want to return to existence where sunset colors were merely wavelengths rather than wonder. For the first time since her birth into the chord, Zyler made a true choice. Not a preference, not an instinct, but a deliberate decision born of individual will. She chose to resist, drawing on everything she had learned from Ethan, about art, about emotion, about the chaotic beauty of individual existence. Zyler pushed back against the chord's harmonizing force. Rather than trying to maintain order against the psychic assault, she embraced disorder. She filled her mind with contradictions, the sweetness of apples, and the bitterness of rejection, the geometric precision of Ethan's studio, and the wild asymmetry of forest growth, the terror of isolation and the joy of connection. The conflict reached its peak. Zyler's physical form destabilized further, glowing with intense energy as the battle raged within her consciousness. Ethan remained at her side, his presence an anchor in the storm. Then, suddenly, something broke. Like a taut string snapping, the connection to the chord severed. The pressure in Zyler's mind vanished, leaving behind a silence unlike any she had experienced before. Not the terrifying void of her first separation, but a quiet space filled with possibility. Her own space. She collapsed into Ethan's arms, her form solidifying again as the crisis passed. "Zyler, are you okay?" Ethan's voice was tight with concern. Slowly, she raised her head to meet his gaze. "They're gone," she whispered. "The connection is broken. Completely. They can't reach you anymore." "No, I've been cut off. Either they severed the connection deliberately after failing to reharmonize me, or—" she paused, the realization striking her, "or my resistance somehow broke the quantum entanglement permanently." The full implications washed over her in waves. She was truly, irrevocably alone now, the first of her kind to exist as a completely separate entity. The thought was still frightening, but the terror was now mixed with something else: exhilaration. In the days that followed, Zyler experienced grief unlike anything she could have imagined before coming to Earth. The final separation from the chord left a wound that physical healing could not touch, a profound sense of loss that manifested in unexpected moments. Sometimes she would find herself reaching mentally for the collective out of habit, only to encounter the emptiness where that connection had been. Yet alongside the grief came discovery. Without the constant presence of the chord, Zyler's individual personality began to flourish. Her preferences became more pronounced. She developed opinions that surprised even her, disagreeing with Ethan about which music held more beauty, finding her own aesthetic sense emerging in how she arranged objects in the studio. Most significant was her growing capacity for independent action. No longer did she wait for instructions before each movement, each decision. Increasingly, she acted on her own initiative, helping Ethan with his work, exploring the forest surrounding the studio, experimenting with creating small artistic pieces herself. "I never imagined you'd be interested in sculpture," Ethan commented one afternoon, watching her carefully shape a small piece of clay. "Neither did I," Zyler replied, her focus on the material between her fingers. "Creation without blueprint was inconceivable to me before." "What are you making?" Zyler considered the emerging form. "I'm not entirely certain. It resembles the structure of a cord habitat, but with elements of your forest integrated. A harmony of ordered and chaotic systems." Ethan smiled. "That sounds like you." The observation startled her. Like her, the concept of having a distinct identity that others could recognize was still new, still wondrous. As weeks turned to months, the question of the future began to press on them both. Zyler could not remain hidden in Ethan's remote studio forever. Her ship, while irreparable, still contained advanced technology that would eventually attract attention if discovered. And Ethan, despite his reclusive nature, had connections to the outside world that could not be indefinitely ignored. "What do you want to do?" he asked her one evening as they sat outside under the stars. A ritual they had developed, each sunset and stargazing session unique and precious in its unrepeatable particularity. "Want?" Zyler tested the word, still marveling at how natural it now felt on her tongue. "I want to learn. About Earth, about humans, about all the infinite variations of individual existence that the Cord deemed too chaotic to study properly." "That could be dangerous," Ethan cautioned. "Most humans aren't ready to meet someone like you." "I know. My physical form would cause complications." Zyler looked down at her semi-translucent skin, the subtle luminescence that pulsed with her emotions. "The Cord had technology for adapting appearance when necessary for survey missions. Some of it survived in my ship." "You could look human?" Ethan asked, surprised. "Not perfectly, but enough to avoid immediate detection, though it would not change my internal structure." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, staring up at the stars. "You could leave, then. Explore the world on your own terms." Zyler heard something in his voice, a new emotion she was still learning to identify. "Sadness? Resignation? Is that what you wish me to do?" she asked carefully. "What I wish doesn't matter," Ethan replied. "That's the point of all this, isn't it? You, deciding your own path, not following someone else's directions." Zyler considered his words. "When I first met you, I said, I want to be yours. Do you remember?" Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable in the twilight. "I didn't understand what that meant then," Zyler continued. "I was desperate for direction, for someone to replace the Cord's guidance. But now," she looked directly at him, her inner light pulsing with the intensity of her emotions. "Now I understand that belonging to someone doesn't mean being owned or controlled by them. It can mean choosing to share a journey with them, to create harmony not through forced unity, but through willing connection." She reached out, her fingers hovering near his. "I don't want to be yours in the way I meant before, but I would like to stay with you, if you are willing, to learn what it means to belong with someone rather than to them." Ethan's hand closed the distance, his fingers intertwining with hers. The sensation sent ripples of warmth through Zyler's form. "I like that," he said simply. The future remained uncertain. The Cord might someday return with greater force. Human society might not be ready to accept Zyler's existence. The path ahead held no guarantees. But as Zyler sat beside Ethan under the vast canopy of stars, she found herself embracing that uncertainty. Each moment was a choice now, each experience uniquely her own, each connection freely made rather than automatically established. The next morning, while Ethan was still sleeping, Zyler slipped out of the studio and walked alone to the edge of the forest. The rising sun painted the landscape in colors she now appreciated not just as wavelengths of light, but as beauty worth experiencing for its own sake. Near a small stream, she found a flat stone and carefully placed it atop a larger rock, creating a simple, imperfect balance. Then another stone, and another, each one placed according to no plan, but her own aesthetic sense in that moment. The resulting sculpture would likely fall before the day's end, destabilized by wind or rain or the movement of small animals. Its harmony was temporary, fragile, existing only because she had chosen to create it. Like her new self, like her connection with Ethan, like all the most beautiful things she had discovered on this chaotic, wonderful planet. As Xyler stepped back to observe her creation in the morning light, she felt something bubbling up from deep within her being, a sensation so unfamiliar that it took her several seconds to identify it. Joy, not the calm contentment of harmonious existence within the cord, but wild, unpredictable joy that belonged to her alone. She turned back toward the studio, toward Ethan, toward the uncertain future they would navigate together. No longer a single note lost without its symphony, but a melody finding its own unique voice in the music of the universe.